I know that among the work that you've been doing is to evaluate the French language services that are funded by the federal government. And I know that there are funds transferred from the federal government to provinces with regard to provision of French language services. But I wonder if you might be able to share any information that you have with regard to the question of the extent to which the federal government funds French services or French language training or French immersion programs on First Nation and Inuit communities.
I'm not. I know that there is a French language school system in Nunavut, but I can't speak to the presence of immersion schools on First Nations reserves or in First Nations communities off reserve. My suspicion, and this is not based on any data because I don't have any, is that if there were, I would have heard about them.
Well, I think you're quite right, because the reality is that First Nation schools are generally underfunded by the federal government based upon a formula that is not applicable to federal schools, that is applicable to provincial schools. So I too have checked, and I don't know of any French immersion or even any specific funding for French education in any of the First Nations schools. But if you find out, maybe you can share that with us at some point. Do you think that the lack of French services for First Nations, Inuit, and Inuit children might be a hindrance with respect to their capacity to become functionally bilingual in order to accept a judicial appointment at some point in their career?
Certainly, the earlier a child or a young person acquires a second language, the greater their mastery of that language later on in life. And so, if there is no access to second language education, it means it is a significant obstacle and a significant challenge. That's one of the reasons why I have always maintained that until every Canadian child has an equal access to quality second language education, it will always be necessary for the federal government, or for that matter the judicial system, to provide language training, because there are some children who are or young people who are graduating from immersion with a serious degree of fluency, and others who've had no French at all. So for the federal government, which has an obligation to be representative of the population as a whole, there will always be, unless the education system changes significantly, there will always be a need for the federal government to provide language training for employees.